When we were 15, my brother and I had the opportunity to travel with a group of exorcists, which led to a lot of really kind of curious and strange phenomena. And this is the story of some of those phenomena. So I hope you enjoy. To begin with, I want to say that this is my fourth attempt to make this video, which I think is somewhat fitting concerning the subject matter. Because I've had all kinds of weird things going on this morning while I tried to record it. The first time I tried to record it, the batteries got drained in my wireless mic. The second time that I tried to record it, the audio came out completely distorted and muffled. So I had to redo the whole thing. The third time that I started to record it, the video or the recording software crashed and went down. So this is my fourth time trying to do this video, and God willing, it'll actually work this time, and I'll be able to share the story. And I say it's kind of fitting to the subject matter because it's kind of similar to just the endless chain of strange coincidences and experience that are a part of this story. So to give you some background, my brother and I, when we were teenagers, became close to a family that has been involved with deliverance ministries for a long time. And it's a little bit of a traditional thing in their family. He was a second generation exorcist. His father is an exorcist and was the chief exorcist of this group of deliverance ministers. And they learned, or his father was a disciple to another well-established exorcist. So it's kind of been in the family for quite some time. And that's what deliverance ministry is a part of. At least that's how they did their deliverance ministry. It was faith healings, and exorcisms, working with spirits, ghosts, haunted places, things of that sort. They're a really interesting group of people. And I think because of my brother and I's education in biblical literature and extra biblical literature, things like the books of Enoch, the Apocryphal Gospels, which they were all very into, somehow we kind of caught the attention of a few of them. One couple in particular became close friends of ours. And my brother and I, when we were 15, ended up being offered the opportunity to actually go with them on one of their events, to go with them on one of their travels, to attend one of the deliverance seminars that they did and kind of see them in action and participate in it and even help out with it to an extent. And the kind of phenomena and just the strange things that happened all around this, I thought would be interesting to share. And it begins actually the night before the event. And what happened is the church that was going to host us for this event called last minute and canceled. Then what ends up happening, this apparently was a normal thing. This apparently happened all the time, that last minute a church would call and cancel. So they always had a backup church. So they called the backup church and they said, no, we're not going to host you either. So then they went to their third backup venue, which was a community center, and they were able to reserve it last minute. And so the day before the deliverance event, we had two churches cancel on us, and we had to move to a new venue, and the other churches, I think, redirected everybody, let them know where we were going to be now instead of at the church. What I found to be interesting about this is they had planned for this. This was part of what they normally go through. They tend to get a lot of backlash. To their minds, this was spiritual backlash, right? Maybe you don't believe that. Maybe there wasn't something spiritual happening. But certainly that's how they understood it, was as a kind of spiritual phenomena or kickback from negative forces, trying to keep them from doing what they perceived as being very good spiritual Christian work. Certainly, since deliverance ministry is maybe in some ways a little bit controversial, one could argue that, it's just kind of last minute, the church is deciding they didn't want to be associated with that. Like most things in this story, it's not any individual one thing that necessarily makes it seem peculiar or supernatural. It's when you start stringing the events together. So we all meet early in the morning at the church, and we're going to head out from the church to the city that the event is happening in. And it's only a 2-hour drive, hour and a half, 2-hour drive from the church. But they regularly gave themselves 2 to 3 times more time to get to the city than the actual estimated travel time. And the reason why they always did this is regularly, apparently with some incredible consistency, a few of their vehicles would break down or have car issues, and it would delay the whole trip. Because of this, they caravanned with more vehicles than they needed to. And there were maybe 10 or 11 of us altogether, my brother and I included. And we were traveling in 4 or 5 different vehicles altogether. And they intentionally traveled with more vehicles because they knew one of them would break down at some point. And they also traveled with spare tires anytime they went to these events. And sure as can be, we hit the road. We get about 30 minutes down the road on the interstate, and one of the cars has an engine issue, and we all have to pull over, try to figure out what's wrong with it. And if memory serves, we just left it there, figured we'd worry about it later, and we all piled into the other vehicles, which is part of the logic behind why they caravanned. Then, about another 30, 40 minutes down the road, the tire blew on one of the cars. This was our second stop within an hour and 10 minutes on what was supposed to be a 2-hour drive. And it's already been 2.5, 3 hours, and we're only halfway there. And so in this way, this was what I found so interesting about this was that to them, this was just par for course. This is something they actually planned for. They brought extra tires because of this. Because again, they understood this as being some kind of spiritual kickback, some kind of psychic backlash that was happening from negative forces as a result of them trying to get to this event. Finally, we make it to the town of the event, and we go into a grocery store to get some food for lunch, and a few people start barking and gnarling like dogs. I mean, they're like foaming at the mouth and barking and growling at the main minister, the main priest. And he just kind of says a few prayers under his breath, and then they all kind of scurry and scatter and leave. And I'm thinking, what the heck is going on? And again, he looked at my brother and I, and he kind of explained that, again, this is just par for course. They've prepared themselves spiritually for this event, and all kinds of weird things tend to happen as a result of that spiritual preparation. Then we get to the event, get everything set up, and this was probably the first time in my life I got to experience witnessing someone who had one of the kind of classical biblical gifts of the Spirit. There was a gentleman in our company, maybe in his 30s, big fella, who had some kind of gift of foresight. And again, this is I'm telling you my experience of this as a 15-year-old watching this and seeing this for myself. So these are the facts of what I experienced. That doesn't mean necessarily that my understanding of them was the fact. Maybe some people will say that some of this was somehow contrived or staged or planned. And certainly that could be possible, but having spent by this point a lot of time around these people and having been able to travel with them and help set up for the event, they were never away from us or separate from us. We did all of our meetings together. It certainly would have been kind of a strange, out of character and elaborate hoax for the group of them to try to pull off. But this, at least to me, being 15, watching this, and still, in my opinion now, was the first time I'd ever witnessed a clear gift of the Spirit. This gentleman, as we set up the rows, and it wasn't a particularly big area. We were in a little community center, maybe 6, 7 chairs on this side of the aisle, 6, 7 chairs on that side, and maybe 10 or 12 rows deep. He would go through, as we set up the chairs, and he would point to a chair, and he would say, in this seat, there's going to be a young lady sitting here who looks like this, and she's been raped, and she's going to need healing from that. We're going to try to heal the trauma from that. And then he'd move a few aisles down, and he would stop, and he'd say, in this chair over here, there's going to be an older gentleman sitting who has been an alcoholic, has been abusive, has ruined his family because of it, and we're going to need to do some special prayers and healings for him. And he did this, he stopped maybe 10 times, a dozen times as he moved through all the different aisles. And he would point to the specific seat and several times even describe the person. And he kept this all noted down. He wrote it, and I kept note of it as well. Then when the event began and people started coming into the hall, people started sitting in all their seats, and I noticed that his descriptions of some of the people he had pointed out would be sitting in certain seats matched. And as the ceremony, as the service got going, some people had the chance to kind of stand up and share with the group what it was they were there for, but a lot of people didn't. And he would go through, and he would almost repeat himself, but he wouldn't point at the person. He would just put his hand on the aisle, and he would say, in this aisle, there's a person here who suffered from this, and now let's all pray together. He's going to say, everyone close their eyes, and everyone close their eyes. And then you'd see the person that he had, pre-appointed. I mean, you would see the person sitting in the seat he had mentioned before, who met the description that he gave, would just start bawling, would start crying, and then a lot of times would open up and share with everybody what had happened. And it was always what he said had happened. And this is to this day, and I've seen some pretty interesting demonstrations of clairvoyance and things like that throughout my life. I've been around some interesting enough people in my life. But to this day, this is definitely one of the most fascinating demonstrations of spiritual sight, if that's what it was. Otherwise, it's pretty elaborate, a pretty elaborate scheme. But at least my experience of it then, and my opinion of it now, is that this was legitimate spiritual sight. Interestingly enough, about 10-15 minutes into the service, the preacher of the church that had declined us and turned us away came in with his wife in a wheelchair. And his explanation of this, he said somehow she had come down with a sickness, starting almost the moment he got off the phone with the preacher who was the deliverance minister. And by that morning, she couldn't feel her legs or move her legs anymore. And instead of going to the hospital, he felt that this was some kind of deeply spiritual issue that was somehow connected to him turning us away. So he actually showed up a little bit late into the service with his wife in a wheelchair. And she didn't seem to be able to feel what was going on with her legs. Again, could have been some kind of strange, elaborate ruse on their part, on the part of the whole group, who knows. But I can only tell you what my experience of it was. And what my experience of it was at that time was that something strange was happening, both in our rejection from that church and in the ensuing sickness. And when she was prayed over by the group later, she was healed and she was feeling fine. She was able to get up and walk, no problems. Now, the climax of the story, the summit of the story, is that while we were setting everything up and nobody was in there yet, the man had stopped at one seat and he said, "We might need to do an exorcism." And he pointed to this seat. He said, "We might need to do an exorcism." And then he kept moving. And once everyone came in and took their seats, because I was mindful of that, and being 15, I thought, this would be cool. It would be exciting. I was a little let down to see just this old, thin, wiry old lady sit in the seat that he mentioned about exorcism. I mean, this woman couldn't have been 80 pounds soaking wet with all her clothes on. I mean, a tiny 5 foot maybe old frail lady sitting in the back at the seat. And I thought, there's no way. She's got, this is somebody's grandma. It looks like she goes to church every Sunday. There's no way this woman's got some kind of demon in her or something like that. And then as we get into the service, there's a point where if you've ever seen it, it's interesting. There's a point where kind of ecstasy starts to overcome the preacher. And it's assumed that they begin speaking in tongues, which they feel is something they're not in control of. They feel that the tongue is speaking on their own. You may believe it, you may not believe it. I'm just telling you my experience of it. And as they start to do this, some interesting things begin to happen because it seemed to have a very purifying effect. To them, this is the speech of the angels coming through them to create some kind of effect upon the audience. And in this seat, this old lady sitting in the back starts to just go like the movie The Exorcist. I mean, like Hollywood style demon possession, dual vocal cords with a deep voice and her normal voice, speaking at the same time, speaking different languages, belting out Latin and whatever else, and just projectile vomiting. And she's shaking, she's vomiting, she's having some kind of mental collapse or breakdown. And this was expected. I mean, the whole team had prepared for this because they saw that the man had mentioned we might need to do an exorcism. So we move everybody out of the hall into either the adjoining hall or outside. I don't remember where we moved them. So that our whole team could be here with this woman while she went through this. And I'll tell you now, one of the strangest things in my life, I still can't wrap my mind around. For the there was one woman in our group, and 7 or 8, maybe 9 full-grown men, and all of us together could just barely restrain this old lady. She was so strong, she sent the 6-foot fella just rolling. I mean, just tumbling and rolling across the way. And as this is something I was watching, this is something I was a part of. My brother and I are sitting there trying to, tell like, it's okay, like relax. And she's throwing my brother and I around. I've never, to this day, I'm a martial artist my whole life. I did judo, I've wrestled with people, I've done Brazilian jiu-jitsu. I mean, I have wrestled with some very strong people, and that old lady is the strongest human being I have ever wrestled with. It is just defies my comprehension to this day. And finally, there's a point where she kind of passes out a little bit, lets out a deep sigh. A horrendous smell fills the whole room. The pastor banishes and blesses and everything like that. It clears. The lady comes back to. She doesn't remember anything. She doesn't. She's just got a sweet little old lady voice, and she's not quite certain where she is. She knows totally well who she is. She knows where she lives. She knows everything. She knows her life, but she doesn't remember having come to the community center that morning. So we arranged for someone. She got a hold of some family members. They came, picked her up, and we talked with them. And then we brought people in, continued the service. And this was a long thing. It lasted all afternoon, 5-6 hours, I think, between all the different healings for people, prayers for people, people sharing. It was quite a beautiful, very interesting event. And watching what appeared to me to be an exorcism, a valid exorcism, has kind of been this deep, memorable event in my spiritual life. Because again, if you watched my first video about growing up in a haunted home, it's this kind of contact with the spirit world that tend to follow the trend of a lot of my earlier experiences, that all my early experiences with the spirit world were quite negative and quite shocking and difficult. I don't know why there was that strong attraction to that side of it early on. But this has been one of those events that always stayed with me. It impacted my life deeply and kind of had a strong influence on me. I thought it was a very peculiar story, and I thought you all might want to hear it. So thank you all, and hope you enjoyed.